Hello everybody, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. For this episode we're going to start off learning about the magic rules for Warlord. Okay, you're all probably familiar with the Warlord data cards by now, and to determine if you have a spellcaster or not, it's very easy. You just look on the data card, and if it has a section that starts with CP, like this one here does for the Archlich Mondane, he's a spellcaster. He has a CP, that's his casting power, so you know he has spellcasting capabilities. We'll look at the rest of the stats in a second, but if you don't have a CP on the model's data card, it's not a spellcaster. If it does have a CP there, it is a spellcaster. The CP basically works the same way as a model's MAV or RAV for ranged attack or melee attacks. This is just the casting power for a magic attack, and like with other model stats, it is going to degrade as they take wounds. Below the CP, you'll see a small section that starts off with an SP. That's the spell points in the model. It'll have two numbers here. The first one represents the most points you can put into a single spell. So some spells you won't be able to cast because they just cost too many points. The second number are the total magic points you have during the game. So our Archlich can cast a spell that costs as many as 7 spell points. He can't cast anything that's more than that, and he has a total of 18 spell points he can use throughout a given game. When you attempt to cast a spell, whether you're successful or not, the points that it costs automatically come off of the total that you could have during a game. So if you cast a spell that costs 4 points, you lose 4 points. If you're unsuccessful casting a spell that costs 4 points, you still lose those 4 points. And then you're going to see the tomes that each spellcaster has access to. Now the tomes are like what you think they are. They sound like they're a big book of spells. And if your spellcaster has access to it, you can potentially cast any spell that's in that tome. So our Archlich, he has access to the Death Tome, the Ice Tome, and the Storm Tome, and every spellcaster who has access to any tome also has access to something that's called the Open Tome, and these are some basic spells that any spellcaster can use. And then each army or faction has access to very special spells that only their spellcasters can use. And you can also see that our Archlich has a special ability that's tied to his spellcasting. It's called Siphon Soul, and what that does is he can use a specialty action that causes 1 point of damage to a friendly model that's within his line of sight, but then he also gains 2 spell points. When it comes to casting spells, there's basically 2 kinds of spells you're going to cast, and that's either going to be attack spells or non-attack spells. Non-attack spells are the easiest to resolve. What you would do is declare everybody in your army that's going to be using non-attack spells. Then you go ahead, and after you declare that, you make the casting check. This is simply a 10 plus roll, so you'd roll a d10 and add your casting power to it. If it's a 10 or better, the spell goes off and you apply the effects. So if we wanted to cast Wind Wall out of the Storm Tome, first we would see that it costs 3 points for us to cast it. So we know we're going to be under our maximum casting power, and we're going to end up losing 3 points no matter whether we get it off successfully or not. And then we would roll a d10 and add the casting power of 9 for the Archlich to it. And you can see this is a very easy spell for our Archlich to cast. And then we would just apply the battlefield effects for the Wind Wall. There are a couple of general modifiers that apply to any kind of spell casting, and that's first, if you use a focus action right before you cast the spell, you get a +1 to your roll, and if your spellcaster is in hand-to-hand with an enemy model when you're trying to cast a spell, you get a -2 to your roll. And there are also modifiers that are specific to attack spells. If you're casting an attack spell at a model that is shaken, you get a +2 to your roll. And if enemy spellcasters are either targeted by your spell or in the area of effect of your attack spell, they can try to counterspell your casting attempt. And the way they do this is, for every spell point they spend or just get rid of, so that means they're going to have fewer points to cast with as the game goes on, but for every point they spend to try to counterspell, you're going to get a -1 on your casting check. Let's go ahead and go through resolution of an attack spell. Okay, so for our attack spell, we're going to have Mondane square off against a group of Elven Veil Warriors, and he's going to be casting a spell from the Ice Tome. It's called Hailstones, and it will cost him 5 points. It has a range of 18 inches, and he can affect up to 3 enemy models with this. And what it's going to do is he'll create and cast 3 magical hailstones. He's going to choose up to 3 separate targets and hurl the hailstones at them, performing a casting check for each one that he's targeting. He cannot target a single model more than once, and each successful hit will cause 1 point of damage. Now, instead of the target number of a 10 plus, like with the non-attack spells, your target number is now the magical defense, or the MD, of the creature that you're casting the spell against. For the Veil Warriors, they have a 13, so that's what I'm trying to roll. Okay, so to start off this casting example, what we're going to do is, as Mondane's first action, he's going to use a focus action. That'll give him a +1 on his spellcasting roll. And then as his second, we'll declare that he's using a spellcasting attack action to try to cast Hailstones against the first 3 Veil Warriors that are closest to him. We'll just say they're within 18 inches. And then what we're going to do is note our target number of 13. There are no other modifiers to hit except for the +1 for the focus action, and then we're going to go ahead and roll. We end up with a 1, a 4, and a 3, so our ending result is an 11, a 14, and a 13, so the first one that we hit is not affected. The second and the third Veil Warriors each take a point of damage, so we would mark 1 through their damage track, but they would not be removed because each one has 2 damage tracks or 2 wounds. In general, spellcasting combat or magical combat works very similarly to ranged combat, except you're using different stats to attack and defend with, but it's very similar to what you've seen already. Okay, thanks for watching this episode of Reaper Minis TV. Next episode, we'll get back with more reviews.